Hey, welcome to this second conversation with Peachy Mondays, and I'm delighted that today we are joined by Sharath Jeevan, who is the author of this marvellous book, Intrinsic, with a second on its way, which is right up our street for Peachy Mondays, talking about motivation and what's important to people. So I'd just like to start though, Sharath, if you could tell us a bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. So real pleasure to be on. My work is all about helping leaders and organizations navigate their most important inflection moments where they're really it's a question about what the next mountain is to climb. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of external change and internal change to navigate. There's no right answer. How do you set direction in that context? How do you nurture the potential of your team? How do you build a deeply motivating culture? And it's something we'll go deep into today. But also, how do you set a learning agenda as you move through and navigate that inflection moment to cross the other side successfully? I do it with a range of organizations, from large companies like L'Oreal or Shopify, all the way through to civil service organizations, to universities like Oxford and Cambridge, to public sector organizations as well, such as the NHS. I'm also the author of a book called Intrinsic, as you said, and my second book, Inflexion, is coming out in January.
Fantastic. And what led you to this point in your career? What's kind of your wider background been?
Yeah, so I started my career in the corporate world, working for large brands like Booz and Company and strategy consulting. After about 12 years in the corporate world, I took 15 years to be a social entrepreneur and a CEO myself, founding two educational organizations. They reached between them about 10 million young people and children around the world, both the UK, but also emerging countries like India, Indonesia, East Africa, etc. And I think from that, I learned how challenging leadership was and how difficult it is being in the ring as a CEO, as a senior leader. And I really wanted to devote this chapter of my life to helping other leaders who are in that ring fight better, really be more successful and enjoy their boxing more and really achieve where they want to go. I think a lot of leaders do get trapped and almost playing the game of someone else and not quite fighting in their own way. So a lot of the work I do is about how to build that deep intrinsic motivation into how we lead, so we can really take organizations and the people we lead to places they wouldn't have gotten to otherwise.
Fascinating. I was talking to somebody the other day who was talking about how lonely like a CEO job can be, and that's interesting about playing somebody else's game. Like what's the mold of the CEO that you have to like feed into and shape yourself into, and how that can be, it's quite difficult to ask for help in that role, and that's why it can be quite lonely.
No, definitely. We see that when you look at the stuff with our politicians, Dominic Raab and all that stuff recently. But look, I think a lot of it is not because people are bad or anything like that. I think it's because we have these sort of stereotypes of leadership. And I've been doing a lot with our parliament actually, and what's been coming up with so many MPs saying, look, I've never been taught about leadership before. It's just something that's assumed. As a result, I go to these easy sort of heuristics, these stereotypes of what it is, and try and be this strong, dominant leader. That doesn't work, of course, anymore. But unless there's a better model, a better way of doing things, I'm going to revert to that by almost by nature. And I think part of it is how do we provide a different set of tools and mindsets and mental models that will really enable leaders to lead differently in these times.
Yeah, marvelous. And I guess that's where inflection comes in, doesn't it? That kind of pause and reflect, and how did we get here and how do we move on? Before we talk about inflection though, can we talk about intrinsic just a little? So one of the things you talk about in Intrinsic is that how modern society or societal shifts have kind of put more of an emphasis on the extrinsic motivation. Would you mind talking just a little bit more about that and why that can have a negative effect?
Yeah, so I think what tends to happen is we want to achieve results, right? All businesses want to do that. That's completely understandable. But often what we do is we try and get to the results rather than thinking about what are the intermediate outcomes, the things in between that will achieve the results and make them sustainable. So a lot of modern business now is really predicated on this idea of gaming, right? There's a target, maybe it's a profit target, a sales target, a turnover target, whatever. We basically game the system as a leader or manager to achieve that target, and it becomes an empty, hollow thing. And we've been driven almost entirely by the incentive. We might have a bonus linked to it, share options, whatever. But as a result, we do all kinds of things that are not congruent with who we are. They don't command respect in the marketplace. They certainly don't command the trust and alignment of our teams, people we lead. I think a better way is to, yes, except of course we need to deliver results, but let's focus on actually achieving the thing in a better way. Let's try and build deep purpose into the activity itself. So helping and serving customers. Just an example. I just got my car insurance renewal quote 2 weeks before the deadline, before the renewal date, and there's been a 60% increase in the premium. And I haven't same car, I live in the same area, I've not claimed at all. It's completely random, and of course what it's doing is exploiting any kind of inertia on my part, right? So if we kind of lead in that way just to achieve a revenue target, what do we stand on? So how do we try and build a sense of helping and serving others into our work as leaders? And I think business has a really important role to play. How do we build deep autonomy so that we feel that so employees can feel they can work in a way that really feels right for them and their own strengths and their own uniqueness as an individual? And also then how do we build mastery where employees and our teams can feel like they're developing in lots of ways, not just in technical areas, which we do generally a better job of developing, but also in the human areas that we feel are really important to grow and are going to be really important given AI and everything else to keep developing. So really building these elements of purpose, autonomy, mastery into the working culture, into how we show up as leaders and role model these things ourselves, into how we wire relationships into an organization. But most of all, I think how we ourselves behave, because if we don't walk the talk ourselves, our employees and our teams are not going to follow suit. So it's definitely accepting the results are part of life. We've got to achieve them, but how we achieve the results is, I would argue, even more important.
Yeah, fabulous. You mentioned AI there as well. That's something that we're very interested in Peachy Mondays, and kind of how it can help and streamline work and help us find meaning in lots of different comments that people leave, but we're very conscious of not using it to replace some of the human attributes that are required for that task, to understand kind of context and meaning. And so you mentioned kind of that mastery of more of the, what they might call soft skills in the context of AI. Are you able to just explore that a bit more? Just what kind of things we might need to develop as a result of more AI?
Yeah, so if I look at how leaders spend their time today, and I've worked with about 200 leaders, Kerry, in about 20 countries over these last 3 years or so. I think one of the things that the pattern keeps coming up again and again is that, I think a lot about the hour hand, the minute hand, and the second hand. And I think as a leader, especially a senior leader, we should be spending most of our time on the hour hand, that 5 to 10 year view of where our organizations or teams should go, maybe a little bit on the minute hand, which is maybe the 18-month, 2-year view, and almost no time on the second hand, the next 6 months or even the next month or so. It's almost the opposite, and almost the exact other way around from what I've seen of so many leaders now. So I think what AI can do is take a lot of the mundanity of work out of the picture. I think that model of being a co-pilot, which we're talking a lot about, I think it will need to be, because the reliability of some, I was just seeing a couple of threads where some fairly big gaffes have been made on some of these AI algorithms where, without that human level of some kind of check and balance, we get into dangerous situations, I think, quite quickly. But I think as an assistant to us, to actually help us take out some of that short-term noise, that second-hand noise, and focus more on the long term, focus on inspiring people, building that sense of connection and alignment, coaching and nurturing potential better, building out authenticity in our teams, really helping create a culture of excellence, collaborating, influencing better, and really navigating these uncertain periods of inflection that's much more what the hallmarks of leaders will need to be in the future. I really hope AI will help to take a lot of that short-term noise away so we can focus on what really matters. Whereas right now, I think there's so many hindrances, I think, to really doing that well.
I love that analogy, that hour hand, minute hand, second hand, because you can see when it's happening for leaders, can't you? That, okay, they're getting dragged into or drawn into short-term risks and issues, and by focusing more on the hour hand, they can think more about the legacy that they're going to leave behind, the purposeful legacy they're going to leave behind, rather than is it a hit or a miss on this quarter's sales target.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's lovely.
And I think what can be powerful, Gary, is to link up that idea of the hand with what I often think about like big P and small p purpose. So what's happened with many companies now with the ESG trend has been we think about the very big issues, climate change being the best example. And of course, it's great for every company to try and be as green as possible, to reduce the carbon footprint, all of those things. But I just see so many ways in which customers day in, day out are treated very, very badly. I had a few £1,000s stolen from my bank account, and trying to resolve that with my bank, one of the major high street banks, it was a nightmare. And I banked that bank for 30 years. And so I just think that small p purpose of helping and serving others each day, that relentless focus on that, building a long-term agenda that really helps deliver that for the people that we help and serve through the products and services we provide. That's the most important thing we can do. And if we can align our teams around that. So yeah, I think if AI can be harnessed in that way, there's huge potential.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So let's turn to the intrinsic motivators then. And in the book, you lay out lots of different stories and examples of different scenarios for people and some practical tools. What within that, when you were doing the research for that and over your experience, what's been your kind of most favourite story and potentially the most impactful tool that we have to look at our own motivation as well?
Yeah, so maybe I'll even use my own life, I think, Kerry. So I'm the son of Indian immigrants to this country, the UK. I spent 12 years, I think, very much playing a conventional game of copying others and trying to judge success very extrinsically, very externally, based on status, to some extent money, and so on as well. I think that what really changed my mind actually is seeing so many people who went to top universities. I went to both Oxford and Cambridge, for example, who ended up not that happy in what they do, not that excited, not that fulfilled. And now I teach programs at both universities to help students there, at the business school, for example, find long-term purpose and meaning as well. So I think a lot of it is knowing, really being willing to have the space to step back and talk about, purpose for you. What does that mean? How will I help and serve others? How do I get lost in something bigger than myself? Try and find that. How do I feel, create that autonomy to be able to pick my own path and zigzag and learn as I go. And on the mastery side, being able to sort of think about how different experiences in my career can build an overall portfolio of mastery that helps me develop the long-term place that I want to navigate towards as well. So it takes a lot more conscious effort. It's taken a lot more effort for me. I've gone through 3 or 4 career changes over these past years, but there's been an overall sort of North Star to work with. I feel as a result, I can have much more impact and feel much more fulfilled in my own work, for example.
Yeah, fantastic. And we obviously we met on a coaching course. We were trying to figure out how long ago, 3 years ago potentially. And one of the questions that they asked on that, which I found one of the hardest to answer, is the "Who am I?" question. I always thought that was a very useful, very simple question, very useful tool that we spend very limited amounts of time throughout our lives actually considering that. Who am I? Not what do I have, what do I own, what do I earn, but who am I at the core of it, and how much does that gel with where I am and what I'm doing in my life and that kind of purpose. And we talked about conscious quitting in our last in our last roundtable and our last blog at Peachy Mondays, and just that kind of cognitive dissonance between who I am and what my values are, and what the values of the place where I work. What's kind of your experience been with that, where you've got a mismatch between organisational values and personal values?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, if I take this just that insurance company, that bank as an example, right? Again,
Yeah.
of course, but they have if you go onto their websites, they have wonderful ESG policies. They both have foundations that do all kinds of, I'm sure, good things for the world and so on. But if you don't do this day in, day out, imagine if you're a, you're an operator, you're a caller, sorry, you're answering phone calls for customers on this, and you're having to deal and give this kind of news to customers. How, of course, you're going to have quiet quitting going on. So I think I wrote a piece with a senior person at Slack, an ink around this topic, but I do think with quiet quitting, we've misinterpreted we've often treated the symptoms at too much of a surface level. And we've tried to do things like, incentives to go back into the office as a classic one, or those kinds of pieces. Those are important, but they're mostly hygiene factors. They're things that will reduce demotivation, but they won't create deep motivational alignment. And the truth is we can't motivate someone else, right? But we can create the conditions as a leader for someone to find their motivation, to find those intrinsic or internal drivers of purpose, autonomy, and mastery. So I think we can really rethink that and have much deeper conversations with our teams. A lot of it is not these just surface level things around pay and conditions. That's important, of course, given the cost of living crisis, but it's much deeper about, I don't see that link between, as you said, that where the company is going or it wants to go with what drives me as a person. And I think of work nowadays much more like a marriage where, we as an employee is there, of course, to fulfill a company's but a company is also there to achieve, help fulfill an employee's one as well. And it's when the two are in balance, I think we have really good working relationships and career structures and so on. So I would encourage everyone who watches this to develop a personal mission statement for themselves. My one, if I help leaders across sectors to navigate inflection moments by writing, coaching, and advising. So I help, who am I helping? So leaders across sectors to do what? To navigate inflection moments, and by writing, coaching, and advising. If we can all have a sense of that and be able to express that very simply, it gives us a sense of where we want to contribute. And then that means we can carve and job roles that will be much more fulfilling with our employers and with our managers as well.
Yeah, great. I think that is such an important point, isn't it? We can't really motivate other people, but we can create the conditions where we can have those conversations. And Peachy Mondays is kind of all about listening and acting on listening, but it's also about the kind of follow-up conversations that you'd have potentially after a survey. So if I was going to have a follow-up conversation, if I was a leader and I wanted to create that environment for people, what kind of questions do you think I should be asking my teams, the individuals who operate in my teams?
So one of my clients actually runs an education organization that impacts millions of young people around the world. He's based in the States, in Chicago. He has a wonderful practice where he takes the Gallup, the 10 questions, of course, but I know there's some better ones for Mondays, but whatever those questions are. But he asks his employees to come in twice a year, fill in the questions beforehand, and they actually talk about the answers together. He doesn't ask them he asks them to give the score, of course, but also underneath the reasons why they scored it that way around. And these are things like, I feel supported at work. I feel able to do my best work, for example, those kinds of basic questions. But I think it's the conversation that matters. That's why I think what is very important. The questions matter, but I think it's more about the feedback loops and the sense of space, in the sense to both sides, the leader or the employer and the employee, co-crafting, co-creating the work environment together. That's what we need to get to. And that's, I think, the cause of the fact we're not doing that is what's causing so much of this quiet quitting challenge, where we've got millions of people now in the UK and other countries who are able to work but don't want to go into the workforce. I think we've got to change that culture to be a much more mutually reinforcing one, a much more positive one, where we're developing and growing together.
Yeah, Fab. So you could take any set of questions then that are important to both parties, isn't it? And do that. Have a where I used to work, we had a great place to work check-in. So it was kind of 3 questions, which was what motivates you, what makes a great day for you, which is kind of like how do you bring the motivations to life each day, and then where do you see yourself next? So
yeah, I'd agree. I think what I'd probably just say, maybe the bits that I think sometimes we don't do as well, is link that to, we either go very micro, very much the individual employee, but we don't talk about where the company is going. It's the alignment. So if I had to suggest 4 of them, maybe it's do you feel aligned and do you fully understand and buy into the company's overall direction? That direction question. Do you feel your potential is being fully nurtured? The potential question. Do you feel there's a culture where you can find your own motivation in it? That's the motivation question. And the last one would be about, do you feel able to learn and grow and develop? So those 4 areas, in whatever way they're phrased, but it's those are pretty simple questions, but it's more the conversations around the questions that really matter, and the ability when it's on both sides to act on that and do things differently as a result. I think that's what is really, really game changing.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, we could probably talk all day, and I would like to ask you one more question actually about your upcoming book, and the kind of what inspired that, and kind of what's a summary of that.
Yeah, so no, it's coming out in January. It's called Inflexion, and the idea really was I've been helping leaders across so many sectors now navigate their fiercest inflection moments, where they're really trying to think of the next mountain and how they get across that chasm. And I think there's so much in there that isn't being well explained right now. And I think the power of inflection moments is that you have a chance in maybe a year to define a company or organization for 5, 10, 15, 20 years to come. So these are kind of very make or break moments, and you don't have a lot of great guidance for leaders that I could find, at least, around that. That's what I do as my bread and butter, and I felt like actually synthesizing the learning from that to have a much more systematic framework for navigating those moments and really future-proofing success. That's the core. That most leaders I've worked with, they're already successful in their organizations, but that success is not guaranteed. How do you future-proof it so that they feel fulfilled and motivated, so their teams, but also their organizations have a role in the years to come and are relevant in those years as well.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today, Sharath. I think that people can connect with you on LinkedIn, and let me just flash the book up again. So Intrinsic is the book. And if you would like to know more, then please, as I say, do connect with Sharath, connect with us at Peachy Mondays, and I'm sure we'll be able to answer any more questions. But thank you so much for your time today.
Real pleasure. Thanks, Kerry.